Hi there, my name is Troels and welcome to Soundpaint. In this video, we're going to go deep in and look at our 2020 PRS guitar, which is the most modern guitar we have in Soundpaint, and granted also the most extended one at this point. In fact, this library is so big that I decided to break it into 3 different libraries. When Darren recorded the guitar, and he's going to tell you a lot about that, he essentially recorded it clean. He did it with a very specific overdrive setting and then with another specific fuzz, not bus, sorry. Though buzzy is kind of fuzzy in my opinion. But either way, each of them turned out so big, about 20 gigabytes, that we decided to break them up into 3 different libraries. So in this video here, we'll create YouTube chapters so you can listen to what version you want to listen to. But if you're like me and kind of want all of it, hang on for the journey here, because this instrument is the first time I felt I could really do like electric guitar solos. And keep in mind, we haven't even gotten to hammer-ons and legatos and all that, which will be surely the UDS additions to these libraries here. We're just demonstrating where we're at with 127 velocity layers and how playable and how good it feels on the keys. So without further ado, Darren is going to take over. He's going to tell you about how he did the project, how he did the sampling, show you this beautiful instrument. It's one of my favorite guitars. It has such a soulful yet clean modern sound. And a fair warning, I've written over 20 minutes of mini demos here, so there's an enormous amount of musical content to get into. There's so many things you can do with this guitar, and the way we sample it is groundbreaking because you can do things like going from palm mutes and then morph into open strings, which is a very common move on a guitar, but we haven't really been able to do that kind of stuff with technology before now. It's really groovy to play and it feels so elastic and fluent on the keys. So Darren is gonna take over and then I'll come back.
Yeah, so the Paul Reed Smith or PRS McCarty 594. It's a lovely guitar, and it gets its name, well, it gets the second part of its name because of the scale length, so it's 24.594 inches. But the first part, McCarty, is because it's named after Ted McCarty. So he was in charge of Gibson back in their heyday, so, you know, he was there when they were making, you know, Les Paul Bursts. He helped design the SG, the Flying V, the Explorer. Did a lot of innovations for the instrument, you know, the Tunematic Bridge, stop bar tailpiece, center lock for ES guitars, and he was a mentor for Paul Reed Smith. So this guitar definitely has some Gibson influence or homage to it. You know, it's got this beautiful carved maple top, much like a Les Paul, figured, quite beautiful. It's got a similar pickup layout with the 2 humbuckers through a toggle, and each pickup has its own individual volume and tone. So very much a Gibson thing, but it is its own instrument. It has its own unique sound. It has a lot of really high-end finishes. I mean, the binding on here is just, it's gorgeous. I love the binding around the body, and it's got this beautiful beefy tailpiece, which probably helps it sustain as long as it does, because it really sustains for a long time. I don't have a lot of experience with PRS guitars. You know, they were kind of always out of my price range. You know, I demoed a few in music shops, but I'm not really, you know, that guy at the music shop. I don't sit there with the amp cranked to 10 and play every riff I know for 20 minutes. I pretty much, if I see a guitar catches my eye, I'll pick it up, see how it feels, plunk a couple notes. If it sounds good unplugged, then I'll be intrigued to maybe plug it in, and even then I barely play anything. So sampling this was a real treat, because, you know, I've gotten to know the guitar quite well, and when I'm not recording it, I, you know, get to play it and just really become a fan of PRS guitars. Anyways, they kind of got on the map when Carlos Santana started playing them, and, you know, Dave Navarro and Joe Walsh and all these other great players have had one in their collection. The pickups, I think these are what PRS calls low turn pickups, which means, you know, less winding, so they have a low output reading. Basically, it's voiced to be like vintage pickups. They're really pretty open, and the mid-range it's not scooped, but it's not as biting as, say, like a Gibson humbucker. So it's definitely got its own sound. It's just a really well-made, great playing, great sounding instrument, and it's beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. As far as sampling is concerned, you know, you have the clean tone, which is quite lovely, and then I also went ahead and gave you some British overdrive kind of crunch, so you get this nice distortion sound. And then of course I threw a fuzz in there because you can never have enough fuzz. The fuzz pedal is Roger Mayer, so he was the tech for Jimi Hendrix back in the day. You know, he modded Hendrix's pedals and built quite a few for him. So the pedal I used is more of his modern take on the classic fuzz circuit. One of the things we did with the sampling was give you chords, and when you play chords that go beyond, you know, a fifth and an octave, and you start adding a third in there, you get some really cool beating within the fuzz pedal. So that's a lot of fun. Other things, you know, we did a lot of like transitions. You've got some length transitions where it's going softer or shorter and gets louder, gets longer, and then of course the palm muting kind of transition, which just to kind of go from, you know, open as you get louder. That's something guitar players really do when we play. And you know, you can morph between chords, chords. Right? Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the library. I had a lot of fun making it. And yeah, till next time.
Alright, so that was Darren's take on the guitar, how he sampled it, the beautiful pedals and all the fuzz going into it. And let me just start by playing a variety of mini demos made with the clean version of the guitar. I won't be talking here, you're just going to hear a variety of musical examples, and then after that I'm going to go in and play some of them here so you can see how they're actually playable and how elastic and beautiful this library is. The clean version is one of my favorites. It just has such a beautiful modern pop sound, but yet with that sort of warm vintage in it too. Isn't it cool? The clean guitar, it just has so many vibes to it. For example, in this first example here. It's not hard to play at all. Let me just try to play it live here while it's playing. And when we talk about an elastic instrument, it's like you can play it so soft. But because you have 127 velocity layers, it's like... And when you use the mod wheel over here on this particular program here, you get that sort of famous octave effect. And also in Soundpaint, as you know, we stretch the notes so deep that you get into the bass region of the instrument. But in reality, this guitar does not have a bass region, but in Soundpaint, we'll create it artificially, and it just makes this beautiful bass sound. Great for that sort of jazz effect. But when you're playing with the keyboard here, the velocities are so sensitive like they are on a piano. So it's so easy to create these like realistic licks. Because you have that sort of connection with the instrument, because of all the velocities, you don't get those sort of bumpiness in it. Let me just try to improv a little bit on this one here. that soft? It's just there at the very edge of your velocity sensitive fingertips, if I can say that. Let me play you another example here from the demos. So one of the unique aspects about the library is that you have specific parts that are chord based. So we recorded strumming in multiple velocities and with multiple round robins as well, covering all the most common chords. That's a minor right there. So you can hear when you play it softly, you can get it all the down to like the sort of like percussive strums, and then just hit it harder. So it's pretty cool because it's both velocity and round robin based, and it brings you closer to the guitar. Strumming is inherently difficult to do on a piano. That's why we sample them this way as well. So you have access to it. And when you put them inside of a composition, you add a few more things, you get some of that real strum feel in there that's hard to do with MIDI. And then you just add this sort of little funky instrument here. Love this one here. Has a beautiful sort of chorus effect to it. Let me just look at the effects here. Yeah, and the mod will add some extra chorus on it, just like so cool. Because it's so like... And it's not necessarily that it's like, okay, that's not like totally like a guitar, that's more like a piano thing. But this is Soundpaint, you know, it doesn't have to always just be the instrument as it is in acoustic reality, but it can also be these sort of more hybrid in-betweens. It's just super sweet on the keys. And then there is this one here. Isn't that sweet? Let me just try to isolate it here so you can hear it solo. And if you notice here, this articulation is called transition. Keep an eye out for those because those are my favorite articulations in the library. Darren and I have talked a lot about how to try to convert the guitar to the keyboard. I mean, you're coming from something like this to something like this. It's totally different. You can't strum, you can't glide, so many differences. So how to do it, how to make the keyboard come alive, the box alive, how to make you feel it on the keys. Well, it happens when guitar players play a lot, they tend to mute their notes and then sort of open up. That's a part of the expression in the guitar and hit the strings harder. So it occurred to us that we could try to do all those stages that you go through in this sort of motion on guitar from muting to opening up the string, and then try to use our morphing technology to really build that on the keys. And in return, you get what I think is maybe my favorite guitar patch on a keyboard that I've ever played. It's just so damn nimble, and I shouldn't talk. Talk is cheap. And if you notice here, it's never the same note. So there's so many variations, even when you just repeat notes in tremolo fashion. And you can hear down here, These are just subtle mutes. And as you play harder, the instrument opens up more, and it allows you to do things like so those very sort of funky little like and for example, if you do like so for example, when you're playing on a guitar, imagine you're playing da 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 ga da ga da ga da da, like it's so refreshing that you never get the same note. I can't tell you how important that is. And with sampling, if you really think about it, often we're triggering the same sample on the same velocity, but not in Soundpaint. It just makes it so alive. And the fact that you're coming from those sort of muted notes, and you can sort of open up when you want, it just really adds a lot to the expression. Also good bass. And you probably noticed in the video as well that I was using our P bass to add a little more extra to it. This is a separate library in Soundpaint, but when you combine the two, it's like super sweet. And the P bass just has that sort of very funky quality to it. It goes really great together with the PRS for some reason. Let me show you another example here. I just thought it was so groovy. And you know, sometimes that's all we need. Music is, especially like when you get into pop and more sort of high-end production, is a lot more about learning to limit than it is to add. And when you have a sonic sauce that's this good, a quality instrument this well sampled with this much expression, it's pretty easy to just like improvise your way out of it. Listen to that bass. Okay, I actually didn't notice that before. This is a fat bass. And you can hear the release trigger. Like that swoop is the release trigger of the instrument pretending to be a bass, and a beautiful one. And it's such a cool sound on its own as well. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Tones are changing, filters are changing. Alessandro did a beautiful job in terms of just really creating sort of a new sound. Let me try to turn the filter off here. And let's turn the rain delay off too. And if you notice here, there's a couple of different things going on. I'm going to turn all the effects off here and isolate each instrument here. You'll notice over here we have something called palm mute length transition. So these are palm mutes that are going from that very, very short percussive sound and then sort of expanding themselves the harder you play. Like it dies quickly in the beginning, but the harder you play, the longer it gets. But you're still in the region of palm mutes. You combine that together with a sustain, I think there's an ADSR on the first one here. Yeah. He took the attack and swooped it in. That's so sweet. If I play the sustain from the very beginning, it's more like... And I do that in certain of the programs that I made where you will actually have sustains and percussive, more sort of short note sounds together. So you can dial in the mod wheel when you want to get more percussive and sort of have that more direct attack as well. It's a cool thing. Here's another example. In this case, I took multiple sustains and put them together to create a little bit of a bigger sound and create a natural chorus effect by having multiple versions of the guitar. This is our main sustained 3-patch. Isn't it sweet? It's made by combining 4 different guitars. I wanted to create more of a sort of a natural chorus effect by adding multiple sustains together. And if you notice down here in the sequencer, you'll see that there are certain times where the notes are definitely not on the grid, and they do a lot of little things like this, for example. This one. Because when you play a guitar, you'll be strumming on it like... So I try to do the same thing on the keyboard, and it just essentially means playing a little bit sloppy. So you're like... But if you play piano, it doesn't have that guitar feel to it. And that's something you sort of have to get used to by playing a guitar in reality and figure out how does it work in a virtual world. Those are things we can't do for you. That's the sort of translation issue going from a guitar to a keyboard. But if you play in that strumming fashion, and use those overlaps, those kind of little licks. Alright, so that was the clean guitar. In this next chapter, we're going to go in and take a deep look at our overdrive guitar. Something magical happens in reality when you have a real instrument, 2 pickups, preamps going into amps, going into distortion, going into pedals, analog pedals in this case. There's a marriage of electricity and strings that cannot be replicated in the digital world. And that's one of many reasons that we decided to do 3 different versions of the same guitar, the clean that we just listened to, and now the overdrive. Aren't they sweet? It's so full of life and so bubbly. Let me take you through some of the mini demos here. Let me play a little bit with it too, because it's so beautiful and agile and elastic to play. Check out here this first demo, what actually happened if you look here closely at the guitar. If you notice here in the DAW and you look closely at the velocity layers here, you'll notice this note here, for example, this guy here, it's a little bit hotter. This is me going through all the velocities. And normally you would get bumps, but check out here, if I just move it a little bit, how the tones slowly go down from that openness to that sort of more palm muted. It's really incredible we can do this with sampling. Like how many versions, how many velocities. You notice down here that it almost just becomes a percussive sound. And you can almost do like tremolo. And there's also new samples generated. Even on each velocity, you get variations too. That's why you could do these kind of things. Like it's the best way I can describe it. It kind of feels like just sitting with a guitar and noodling. And it can be so piercing. Or not so piercing. Or maybe a little more. It's so nimble that way. You can just really check that kind of riff used in a style here. And if you pay attention to the velocity layers down here, you'll notice that the high ones are the ones where you really get the kind of sound. And don't be shy to use your pitch bender either. If you look here, when I really do that pronounced, it's sort of a feel you got to develop. And I love that because on a violin, on a guitar, you develop your own kind of vibrato. I have my style, you're gonna have yours, but it really does work here. I like that sort of more desperate, twangy kind of vibrato for these things. Let me play this solo from this guitar here. This is actually coming from our clean edition. I really think it has a beefy character. It's not the same, and we can try to compare them. That's sort of the clean version, and if we compare that to the one we just listened to here, very different characters, and I just think there's something about this overdrive here that's very piercing, but also very natural. That just sounds like a guitar. Maybe I'm in the music store like Darren didn't like. Thankfully, I don't know how to play rock riffs on a keyboard, so I'll spare you of that. You know what? I take that back, because in this next very segment, we are going to be listening to a lot of Guitar Center kind of demos. Again, here, I'm going to play with the transition. It's a sort of funky demo with a funky drummer underneath and the P bass just to rock it a little bit deeper. But check it out. It's so nimble and funky and old school, but yet has that sort of modern, clean sound to it. Let's try to examine this demo a little more in detail. I'm going to isolate the guitar here, and I'm going to show you a variety of things inside of the DAW here, what's actually going on. If you look down here, for example, you're going to see a lot of pitch bender information. I use it totally freely. That's sort of the way it comes in, and I don't like to play to the grid. I never quantize my stuff inside of the DAW either. It just becomes way more alive. You know, real music, a real orchestra, a real band is not dictated to a grid. And I cannot overemphasize how important it is not to work on the grid. You might have your drum groove on the grid, that's fine. But if you want to solo with soul and all that, just work off the grid. Let's listen here a little more in detail. And let me also show you the velocity information. For example, just here in the beginning, I'm like imagining, like how would I do it on a guitar? Yeah, I would sort of keep the rhythm going just by making a few like. You know, it's kind of like feeling it, and I think it's important when we work with virtual instruments to have an idea about how the real instrument works. Otherwise, it's hard to play licks and all that stuff. And I'm not really a guitar player. I know how to like noodle on it, but I'm not like the expert. But I've sort of scraped things over time from YouTube and some of my favorite like rock albums. So you start gathering some riffs you can combine between. But it's so much more fun when it's so elastic on the keys here. Also, if you look down here, you'll notice I have these sort of fast, strummy kind of things. Like that. It's almost like an error in playing. Like there's a little like, but that's what happens in reality. And that's why I say as well, once we get to the UDS editions of these libraries, which are going to have fret noises and legato, I think it's going to be a super realistic instrument. We are so close already. The fact you can do these kind of... In fact, when we talk about the pitch bender, I want to say like be graceful, but that's not really the point. You shouldn't be graceful. You should be gracious with it instead and really go all out. Notice down here, I've removed all the pitch bender information and just like see how stiff and digital it becomes, like soulless. It just doesn't have soul versus... You know, it's hard to describe. It's just the sauce and the humanity in the instrument. I think this is, in a way, how we connect more with the instruments when they're that elastic and the velocities are so responsive. You get 127 velocities rendered in real time when you play it here, and that's sort of a part of that elasticity, if you will. Hard to explain, but you feel it immediately on the keys, just like you do with like a real piano. All right, here's another example of the transition sustain as well in a very, very different context. Check it out. If you notice here on the downbeat, you'll see the velocity go up here, dang, 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 ding, 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 dang. And you can really accentuate with the guitar that way. And that comes with all the velocity information being able to play in this sort of elastic way. Let me solo it here. Then also went up here and took the clean version here. I have this specific one called Clean Blues Hooker, an homage to the great Johnny Lee Hooker, one of my favorite blues guitarists, and just has that very twangy kind of sound. Like this part here, it's really played sloppy, and you can see there are errors in the CC information, like there's a note that's snuck in here and the vibrato is all over and a little bit pitchy, but that's exactly what I want. That was just the player having a bad day. You know, you can see here that on the pitch bender information that I didn't quite make it, but that's the cool thing about it, because every time you play, you get something slightly new. Let me also show you just the different parts so you have an idea about what you get inside of one of these editions. So for example, here with the overdrive, you have the chords down here, which is all the different chords per octave. So in this octave here, next octave, more clean like power chord, an octave up, minor, Isn't that cool? Let me just try to clean all the effects here and play them completely naked so you can hear them on their own. So this is the overdrive chords. And their velocity bass too. So much sonic information. Do you hear that little swoop in the end too? That little sound is release triggers. We actually have release triggers on our chords as well. It just helps build more sort of realism, if you will. We also have open harmonics. You can play them dynamically too. So beautiful. Let me also show you the power chords. So it's not just that we have chords per octave like I demonstrated, but we also have unique power chords recorded over entire span of the instrument. These are super fun to play with too. I mean, all those delicious overtones, harmonic distortions. I guess we are back in Guitar Center again. When Darren samples, it's with so much emotion, and sometimes with samples, I think this is almost like an unarticulated art form of deep sampling. It's not just recording the instrument, you can totally sit mathematically and play it. I've even seen people use robots to play, and I'm like, oh my God, this is like the worst thing you can do. Because now you get like a robotic thing in something that's already kind of robotic in itself, the DAW, the grid, everything. We want imperfections. We want human beings to play the sounds. So when you go, it's alive. Little bit of vibrato, even on a power chord. It's just the soul in there, you know? We also have sustains here. These are, not necessarily for piano playing, but they're good for solos. We also have touch harmonics. And they're not the cleanest of harmonics. I mean, these have overdrive in them. Oh man. I love the way Soundpaint enhances in the bass regions. Like you can go silly down. You can actually hear the vibrato of every single swing in the note or the string. I think that's the string actually going like, obviously way too deep for normal musical purposes, but even down here, which is far beyond the normal range of the instrument. It's so cool, right? Electricity in every note. If you play a little bit harder, you get a little more of that chorusy kind of vibe to it, even though there's no chorus on it. And softer, much more clean. And obviously we got the transition sustain as well, which I've already demoed too much, but you know the deal. And we also have tremolo parts, really sort of that twangy, desperate kind of. Let me just turn the effects off here so you can listen to it in its core state. And again, these are also round robin and velocity based. And that's just a quick rundown of the parts inside of it here. Let me play 2 more examples before we get to the Fuzz edition of the library here. I didn't say buzz, I said fuzz. This is another variation of the overdrive as well. I just wanted to create some kind of 80s vibe here. This is using the touch harmonics for the overdrive. And try to notice down here, let's examine the grid here. Nothing is on the grid. In fact, it's often a little bit too late. That's kind of my soul vibe, if I can use that word, soul vibe. I don't know, musicians feel. I like to be a little bit late on it. I think it gives a nice groove to things, particularly when they're a little bit slow in tempo here. But virtually nothing is on the grid. And that's a huge part of getting these things to sound more real in your mock-ups. And then there's also an accompanying Jupiter 8 brassy kind of sound. I love this one here. There's nothing like the Jupiter 8 for that sort of 80s sound. Also had a little bit of P bass in here. You notice this guy here is actually more on the grid. Even when I put things on the grid, and this goes for all major DAWs, I like to right click here and then choose some kind of humanized function here. So I'll always make sure that I do that when I work on the grid, just so there's a little bit of life on the grid, if you will. And combined, it all sounds like. You hear that? Even in our delays inside of Soundpaint, there's small analog fluctuations often happening. You just get more of that sort of natural variance in the sound. Collectively, it's just thousands and thousands of little things that are happening in real time, small fluctuations, small nonlinear imperfections that makes it so perfect. All right, I want to play one more example with the PRS OD overdrive guitar here. This is maybe my favorite of the mini demos. It's very 80s. You're going to hear an arpeggiator that's also coming from the guitar, and then this just beautiful solo, maybe my favorite solo sound in the entire library. It just has something very 80s, but very piercing to really, really stands out in the mix. Check it out here. Let me just isolate that solo by itself. Check out here, and what's the pitch bender down here again? That's what I'm talking about when we talk about like the library really being close to a real electric guitar. Let me also play you the arpeggiations here going on. Obviously we're playing with the transition part here for the solo. But we also have these beautiful arpeggiations going in there. Isn't that such a sweet arpeggiation? What Alessandro did in this one here was to combine the open harmonics with the touch harmonics and then create some tone fluctuations and some sort of overall pan fluctuations, just creating this beautiful art. And then also snug in a bass from the Jupiter 8 here. I love this one here. Such a sweet bass. And combined they're like. Let me just try to jam over this groove a little bit here so you can see how sweet and nimble it is. Okay, so that was the overdrive version. As I mentioned, we also have a fuzz or a buzz edition of this library. In this next segment, it's gonna get really warm, gritty, fuzzy, but it has that sort of vintage vibe to it, but yet modern. And as Darren mentioned, the fuzz pedal really has a unique character to it. Just check out here on the chords, how sort of uniquely punchy and how they stick out in the mix. check out here in this next segment, I'm just gonna play with the chords from the Fuzz guitar. It's so piercing, cuts right through the mix. Check it out. Right? It has that super like did, and when you hear in context to the mix, it really still just like pierces its way through the mix. It's a destructive sound, but yet a musical form of distortion. And it's not even that high in the mix. It's actually pretty low. Let me take it up a little bit. It's going to be too forefront in the mix right now, but just to sort of give you that idea how piercing this one is, I'm going to turn the volume up and down a little bit so you can hear the differences. To me, with a sound like this that's so extreme, I don't really want to put it too far back in the mix. It's either a sound you have or you don't. And in this case, it's here and it really fulfills a notable proportion of the mix. Let me add another version now with the overdrive transition guitar playing on top, making it a little more sort of groovy. And then I also added the P bass on top of it that also has sort of unique funky quality, particularly that sort of pick sound on the attack. Let me just isolate it quickly. Let me just play here with the Fuzz chords on the keyboard. Again, every octave representing a unique chord, but just so you can hear how different it is than your sort of traditional soft guitar. This pedal really has unique character. And it feels so good because we have velocity morphing also for distortion, so you can go like... So you have all the different velocities of distortion. And it's just... Let me try to play a little bit with the solo fuzz here as well. This is the transition sustain fuzz. So you get the... Let me try it on the groove here. Yeah, it's so nice, man, because you can really like that sort of almost tremolo effect. It just feels so alive in the way you can like... And in this one right now, I'm using the mono glide. Sometimes it's cool when you want to do like... So you don't have to get the sort of normal action between two keys, but it'll just go back and forth. if I remove the monoglide, it's a little harder to do those kind of things. It's just not the same as. So much like little crackly bubbles inside of it. And that's Darren right there, just moving the guitar slightly when we sample it, just to give a little more emotion inside of the sound. Every single note in these libraries are really infused with musicianship. I think it pays off on the keys when you actually invest in the session, so you sort of become the player. It's so cool that way. But just to offer you an idea about how the different solo sounds between the fuzz, the overdrive, and the clean version, let me just play 3 different riffs here with the 3 different solo guitars in the fuzz, overdrive, and clean order. They're all super cool. They all have musical colors and saturations, and that's why when it comes to these things with guitars, with pianos, with violins, it's not like there's one version of that instrument. There's so many versions of it, even within itself. And when we use these vintage effects and really pour emotions into them, they just come to a new light. They're so inspiringly beautiful. I don't know which one I like the most. I think it really warrants what style of music I'm looking for. Sometimes you want that more piercing sort of guitar. Sometimes you want it more soulful and warm. It's a little hard to sort of define in one instrument, if you will. So that's why we're trying to offer more colors in Soundpaint in our sonic color space here. So if you look down here on the MIDI data, especially on the pitch bender here, see how much stuff is going on? I'm virtually always in motion. It's always like a shake fest down here on the left hand. And that vibrato is also going to be more in touch with the music. Vibrato is not a static thing, so it's a little ironic sometimes when we sample vibrato. Vibrato is really based on the tempo of music. Sometimes you want it more desperate, sometimes you want it slower, sometimes you want it like just a little bit of motion on the string. So in Soundpaint, we're going to try to move more and more down in you controlling it, so it's not some kind of generic fashion. Sure, you can put an LFO and get the perfect vibrato, but there's something not human about that. Instead of, you know, that's computer versus human right there. Let me just compare the main transition solo here for the fuzz with the overdrive edition as well, so you can hear the solo sounds, both the transition articulation side by side. You know, it's a hard choice. Like, if I was to play a solo with both of them, I'm not sure which one I like the most. Let me just try here. like that. Let's check the next one here is also with the solo. And to me, there's like a punk-like quality to the Fuzz Edition here. Let me just play some P bass first and then add the Fuzz Edition on top and some drums, and that's it. And to me, that's the track done. That might be a trio just rocking it just like that. Isn't that a nice sound? Distortion for me is such a delicate subject because we're used to digital distortion, which in my opinion is nowhere close to where we come in reality, specifically once we get into the vintage realm. There's so much sonic information hidden in these vintage units and we have to sample them that way. Like this sound here, for example. And if you noticed here, it's not the same note on every key. And sometimes here, so many velocities as well. Here is another fuzz demo using the fuzz chords as well. Super hard punching, just a P bass, just a fuzz and some drums, and we're rock and rolling. You know, let me try to load this very part here on the clean, and just remember what I just played right now, and then I'll switch to the clean one and try to put distortion on it so you can hear how different it is using digital distortion instead of having something so beautiful as an analog fuzz pedal. So starting here with the fuzz version. And now trying with the regular clean version. And let me try to add some distortion to that as well. Versus the fuzz without distortion on. It's just a different kind of punch. I think it stands out in a different way in the mix. Both approaches are good, but there's something about the analog that to me is warm but very, very piercing in the mix, but not in a sort of digital, harsh, distortive kind of way, but more in a musical distortion kind of way. All right, let's just wrap it up here with one last demo here made with the Fuzz Edition. This is maybe my favorite of the mini demos for the Fuzz. It's so punkish, like I don't give a damn kind of vibe to it. And again, it's just using a P bass, the drums, and the Fuzz Edition here. And then a little bit of a synthesizer, also made with the Fuzz. Isn't that one cool? It's a synthesizer made with the fuzz as well, a fuzzy Moog, if you will. Such a nasty sound. But anyway, as you can see, this library is near endless. There's 3 different editions. You have to figure out what color works for your music. It's something I think we need to go deeper into with sampling as well, and start understanding that when we record any instrument, there's no instrument that fits it all. It's all something that happens in real time with your music. What color do you demand? What kind of instrument do you demand? Modern, vintage? What kind of sound are you looking for? What kind of color? What kind of sound paint are you really looking for? But anyway, this instrument is an infinite multiverse of sonic cascades, of explosive musical galaxies. It's impossible to describe how many variations there is in music. I thought about it the other day because we often sort of talk about there's only 12 notes and you can only do so many chords. But the thing we can do in eternity is texture. And I think the texture of the instrument, the speed of the vibrato, how the instrument was recorded, how it was intended really informs what kind of music it can be used for. If you take something like a clarinet, is it classical? Is it jazz? Is it ethnic? Those dictates different styles of sampling. So in the case of the 2020 here, we really wanted to have a modern take on a guitar, but also offer it with sort of a clean vintage sound in the overdrive and have a little more sort of saturation and warmth in it, and then also offer the ultimate Fuzz Edition here. So thank you for joining me on this incredible, what must be an incredible long journey, because I've shot a lot of videos for this instrument here. Do forgive me for going so insanely deep on these things, but we love what we do and we love these instruments, and I hope it comes off to you as well. Thank you so much for watching.